My name is Silas, and I am a murderer. There's no other way to say it, no softer word for it. These hands, the ones trembling in the candlelight right now, they have taken a life. Not in the heat of a declared war, not in the desperate act of self-defense. I killed a man in the name of what I once blindly called purity, in the name of a twisted, arrogant faith. And now here I am on a ship cutting through the black heart of the Mediterranean, bound for Alexandria, the city of light and knowledge. And I am carrying a message of life, a message of forgiveness. The irony is so thick, so suffocating, it's almost a joke. A demon sent to preach about heaven. I know, I live with that contradiction every single second of every single day. In the worn leather satchel at my feet rests a scroll, just a simple roll of papyrus. But its words hold a power that could save a city. Or it could be my own death warrant. It could cost me something far more precious than my own life. Because I'm not just going to Alexandria to confront a tyrant in theologian's robes. I'm not just going there to challenge a system built on fear and judgment. I am going there to face the ghost of the very man I killed. The story I am about to tell you is not an easy one. It has dark corners, brutal truths, and a twist at the end so staggering, so utterly unforeseen, that even I, the man at the center of it all, could never have imagined it. It will make you question everything you think you know about good and evil, about justice and mercy. So before we venture into that darkness together, I need to know who's out there listening to this confession. Please just do me this one kindness. Let me know where you are watching this from and what time it is in your part of the world. Just leave a comment below. I just need to know that I'm not alone in the long night. All right, the ship is docking. Alexandria. The smell of salt, of foreign spices, and of palpable danger is in the air. The journey begins now. Alexandria is unlike any other place on Earth. It is a seething, glorious, chaotic cauldron of humanity. Under the searing Egyptian sun, the great library stands as a monument of marble and intellect, a silent testament to the power of the human mind. Yet just a stone's throw away, the sprawling markets reek of fish, unwashed bodies, and every kind of vice that can be bought or sold. White-robed Greek philosophers debate the meaning of existence on street corners, while Jewish merchants haggle over vast fortunes in their counting houses, and Roman legionaries patrol the avenues, their polished armor a constant gleaming reminder of an order imposed by the sword. This city is both the pinnacle of civilization and the depth of its decay. It is a perfect, shattered mirror, reflecting the contradictions within every human soul. My first steps on its shores were not toward the brothels or the gambling dens. I sought out the community of the faithful, the people I hoped would be my allies. But what I found there was, in its own way, more chilling than overt depravity. I found the domain of Gaius. Gaius was a remarkable man, tall and imposing, with piercing eyes and a voice like rolling thunder. When he spoke, the entire assembly held its breath. He preached of righteousness, of purity, of a meticulous, suffocating code of laws as the one and only path to God. On the surface, his community was a picture of perfection. The people were well-dressed, their words were measured, their adherence to the rules was flawless. But beneath that polished veneer was a cold, brittle atmosphere of judgment. I could feel it in the quick, assessing glances. I could hear it in the whispers that followed anyone who faltered, even slightly. I saw the way a mother would yank her child away from a beggar, not out of fear for the child's safety, but out of fear of being contaminated by his poverty. They weren't living in love. They were living in terror, the terror of not being good enough, not clean enough, not worthy. They were inmates in a prison of their own making, and Gaius was their warden. I retreated to a cheap, dusty room in a back-alley inn, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. This was so much worse than I had imagined. Gaius wasn't just misguided, he was poisoning an entire community. with a faith that was beautiful on the outside but lethal on the inside. A few days later, a shadow fell across my doorway at dusk. It was a woman named Lydia, her face etched with fatigue, but her eyes held a desperate, flickering hope. She had heard whispers about me, about the message I carried. Her voice trembling, she told me her story. Gaius had been preaching that physical imperfection, that sickness and disability were signs of hidden sin, a punishment from God. Her husband, a devout follower of Gaius, had begun to distance himself from their own young daughter, a sweet girl born with a twisted foot. He believed the child's presence was a stain on the family's spiritual purity. "Master Silas," Lydia wept, her hands twisting the fabric of her robe, "they are turning love into a crime and cruelty into a virtue. Please, you have to do something." Looking into Lydia's anguished eyes, I saw the faces of all the victims I had ever created. I knew then that I could not remain silent. The scroll in my satchel was no longer a theological treatise. It was the only weapon I had to fight for Lydia's family and for all the souls shackled by fear in Alexandria. A confrontation with Gaius was now inevitable. I began quietly, cautiously. I started sharing the message from my scroll in small, clandestine gatherings, in the back rooms of shops after closing, in the hushed intimacy of private homes. I didn't speak of complex regulations or impossible standards. I spoke of a gift, a free gift, an unearned acceptance. I told them that a person's worth wasn't measured by their perfection, but by the boundless love of the one who made them. My words were like cool water on parched land. The message spread through the oppressed corners of the community like a secret fire. I saw tense faces begin to soften. I saw stooped shoulders begin to straighten. For the first time, the outcasts, the unclean, the ones who could never measure up, felt seen. They felt valued. But light always draws the attention of the darkness. It didn't take long for word to reach Gaius, and he could not, would not tolerate it. A message of cheap grace, as he called it, was undermining the very foundation of his world. It was a direct threat to his authority, to the perfect, rigid order he had so painstakingly constructed. And so, during a great assembly in the city's main square, before hundreds of his followers, Gaius made his move. He didn't use my name, but everyone knew who he was talking about. His powerful voice boomed across the stones, echoing off the grand facades of the surrounding buildings. "Beware the wolves who come in sheep's clothing," he thundered, his arm outstretched. "Beware the peddlers of a false liberty. They speak of grace, but they sow the seeds of chaos. They tell you the law no longer matters, that holiness is not required. Their words are sweet as honey, but their path leads to the abyss. We have toiled to build a pure community, a beacon in this fallen world, and we will not allow some heretic to come and extinguish our light." Each word was a lash. The crowd roared its approval. Cries of "yes" and "preach" filled the air. I stood at the far edge of the square, cloaked in shadow, feeling hundreds of pairs of eyes, now cold and suspicious, turned toward me. The conflict was no longer a quiet battle of ideas. It was now a public war. I was no longer a messenger. I was the enemy. I was the threat that had to be eliminated. Gaius had successfully painted me as the embodiment of everything they feared, and Alexandria had just become my battlefield. The pressure mounted with terrifying speed. The very people who had secretly sought me out now averted their eyes when I passed. Shopkeepers suddenly had nothing to sell me. Whispers curdled into open accusations. The destroyer, the heretic, Satan's emissary. That relentless hostility, that profound isolation, it began to pry open a door in my mind. A door I had spent years trying to barricade, to nail shut, to forget ever existed. The door to my past. One night, alone in my squalid room, the distant sound of a street brawl began to morph, to twist into the screams from my memory. The room dissolved around me. I was no longer in Alexandria. I was back on the dusty roads of Judea, younger, stronger, and so much blinder. I saw myself, the Silas of old, my eyes burning with a zealot's fire. I saw myself leading a band of men, our hands gripping the hilts of our swords as we stormed a quiet home. We were the self-appointed purifiers, convinced the family inside was unclean, their faith tainted. The memory assaulted me with the force of a physical blow, the splintering of the door, the terrified cries of women and children, and then I saw him, the man of the house, standing between us and his family. He was unarmed. There was no fear in his eyes, only a defiant, heartbreaking stillness. His name, it came back to me in a sickening rush. Ezra. I remember the name, Ezra. I heard my own voice from the past, cold and detached, reading out his sentence. And then I saw the sword in my own hand, a flash of steel in the lamplight, a spray of crimson, the sickeningly soft thud of a body hitting the floor, and then a silence more terrible than any scream. I snapped back to the present, gasping for air, my body drenched in a cold sweat. I scrambled from the room, stumbling out into the night, and found a public fountain. I plunged my head into the frigid water, again and again, scrubbing at my face, at my hands, scrubbing until my skin was raw, as if I could somehow wash away an invisible stain, a phantom blood that had dried long ago, but would never truly leave me. This wasn't a ritual of purification, it was the desperate, frantic act of a tortured soul. I looked at my reflection shimmering in the puddle at my feet. A killer, a monster. I staggered back to my room and collapsed onto the floor. A vicious, venomous question coiled in my mind. What right do you have to speak of forgiveness? What right does a man with blood on his hands have to speak of grace? How are you any different from Gaius? He uses words, you used a sword. But you both believe you have the right to decide who is pure and who is filth. It was my moment of absolute despair. My purpose, my mission, it all seemed like a grotesque joke. Hope was a lie. I was ready to give up. I would take my scroll, leave Alexandria, and bury myself in some forgotten corner of the world to live out my days in silence and shame. In that abyss of self-loathing, as the darkness threatened to swallow me whole, my hand brushed against the satchel. Numbly, mechanically, I pulled out the scroll. My trembling fingers fumbled with the ties. The candlelight fell upon the familiar ink. I had read these words 100 times. I had preached them to others. But tonight, for the very first time, I was reading them for myself. My eyes fell upon a passage I had often glossed over, thinking it was mere poetry. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God. The words were not ink on papyrus. They were a lifeline thrown into my personal hell. They weren't a promise for the perfect. They were a promise for the broken, a promise for me. That love didn't depend on my purity. It wasn't blocked by my past. It was powerful enough to reach through even the most monstrous of sins. Tears began to stream down my face, carving clean paths through the grime. But these weren't the tears of despair. They were tears of a fragile, terrifying release. I wasn't forgiven because I deserved it. I was forgiven because that love was simply bigger than my sin. Strength began to seep back into my limbs, not the strength of self-righteousness, but the strength that comes from fully embracing one's own weakness. At that very moment, a frantic, desperate pounding rattled my door. I pulled it open to find Lydia, her face a mask of terror. "Master Silas, you must help," she gasped, breathless. "My husband, he listened to Gaius. He said our daughter, our little girl, is a curse. He's cast her out of the house. He threw her into the street, a crippled child alone in the night." The air left my lungs. Her words sliced through all the abstract theology and internal torment. This was no longer a battle of ideas. This was about saving an innocent child from the brutal consequences of fanaticism. My purpose became brutally, terrifyingly clear. I could not leave. I had to stay. I had to face Gaius, not just for the sake of truth, but for the life of a little girl. The chains of my past might never be broken, but tonight, I would not let them stop me from fighting for her future. The news of Lydia's cast-out daughter spread through the community like a fever. It was a crack in the foundation of Gaius's authority. Even his most ardent followers felt a tremor of unease. To cast a crippled child into the streets, this wasn't righteousness, it was barbarism. The pressure shifted, forcing Gaius to defend an act that even his own conscience must have screamed against. He had to prove his doctrine was absolute, that his cruelty was, in fact, divine will. He did it the only way he knew how, with a spectacle of power. He summoned a public trial in the main square at the very steps of the great library. He would, he declared, expose the lies of the heretic and restore the sacred order. The entire community was commanded to attend. This was to be the final, decisive battle. I knew it was a trap, designed to humiliate and destroy me, but I also knew I had to walk into it. To flee now would be to abandon Lydia and her child, to concede that fear was stronger than love. As I entered the square, I felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on me, sharp and hostile. I saw Lydia in a corner clutching her daughter, whom she had found shivering in an alleyway, her small, frightened face buried in her mother's robes. Gaius stood on the highest step, a figure of granite and authority. Today, his voice boomed, his judgment sweeping over the silent crowd, we will separate the wheat from the chaff. This man, he pointed a rigid finger at me, has come to us with honeyed words of unearned grace. He tells you that you can wallow in your sin and still be loved. He is eroding the very bedrock of our morality. Tell us, Silas, on what authority do you preach such chaos? A sea of faces turned to me. The silence was a physical thing, pressing in on me. I took a deep breath. Instead of debating his laws, I chose to wield the only weapon I had left, my own ugly truth. I stand on no authority of my own, Gaius, I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the tense air. I don't stand here as a teacher. I stand here as an exhibit, a living testament to how far a man can fall. I was once like you. I craved purity. I believed I could purge the world of evil with my own strength and conviction, and that belief, it turned me into a monster. I did unspeakable things in the name of righteousness. I told them my story. I spared no detail. I spoke of the arrogance, the fanaticism, the blood. A murmur rippled through the crowd. My raw honesty seemed to be disarming them, bypassing their judgment and touching something deeper. Gaius saw the tide turning. A dark cloud passed over his face. He knew he was losing them. He decided to play his final, most powerful card, a card he believed would utterly annihilate me. You speak of being broken, you speak of grace? His voice cracked, laced with a raw, personal agony I had never heard before. Let me tell you about the true cost of laxity. Let me tell you about the price of a world without rigid laws. I had a younger brother. His name was Ezra. He was the best of us, a pure soul. He saw good in everyone. And one day he was butchered in the street by a zealot, a man who had appointed himself the world's purifier, all because that monster decided my brother's faith wasn't pure enough. The kind of weakness you preach, Silas, it only creates more monsters like him. Gaius was screaming now, tears of genuine rage and grief streaming down his face. His pain was real, and it was a powerful weapon. And then he shouted the name that stopped my heart. Ezra! The name was a thunderclap in my soul. Ezra. No, it couldn't be. The world tilted on its axis. The noise of the crowd, the scent of the city, everything vanished. There was only the ringing in my ears and the horrifying, vivid memory of that night. The face of the man shielding his family, the defiant peace in his eyes. Ezra. My face must have betrayed me, a mask of dawning, unspeakable horror, because Gaius, in the midst of his righteous fury, looked directly into my eyes, and he saw it. He saw the sick recognition. The anger on his face froze, replaced by disbelief, then by a wave of revulsion so profound It seemed to stop his own heart. His entire body began to tremble. He staggered back a step. His voice, which moments before had commanded a city, was now a shattered, broken whisper that echoed in the dead silence of the square. "It was you?" The world fractured. The air in the square became thick, unbreathable. The revelation hung between us, a horrifying, impossible bridge connecting two mortal enemies. The entire crowd witnessed it, frozen in place. The preacher of grace and the architect of the judge's private hell were the same man. Gaius collapsed. The pillar of a man, the rock of their community, crumpled to the steps, burying his face in his hands. His sobs were not loud, just a series of broken, wrenching gasps that were more terrible than any scream. The crowd recoiled, a collective gasp rippling through them, creating a circle of empty space around us, as if our shared tragedy was a contagion. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee their stares, to escape this unbearable truth. But my feet were rooted to the stone. What was the point in running anymore? I had been running from Ezra's ghost for years, and now he stood before me, embodied in the consuming grief of the brother whose life I had irrevocably destroyed. Slowly, I walked towards Gaius. Each step felt like it was through deep mud. I wasn't approaching to defend myself. I wasn't coming to beg. I was simply coming to face the consequence. I knelt before him, not in submission, but in full, unvarnished acknowledgement. Into the stunned silence of the square I spoke, my voice soft, but every word carrying the weight of 1,000 nights of regret. "Yes, Gaius," I said. "It was me." I looked at the broken man before me. "I have no defense. There is no excuse that could ever contain what I did that day. Your brother, Ezra, he did not deserve to die. That is a debt. That is a debt I can never repay. I didn't ask for his forgiveness. How could I? But the raw, complete admission of my guilt, with no attempt to soften or justify it, seemed to do something that no argument ever could. It shattered the cycle of accusation and vengeance. In that moment, I was not the heretic and he was not the judge. We were just two men crushed by the same tragedy, standing on opposite sides of the blade that had caused it. Gaius looked up, his bloodshot eyes a maelstrom of confusion and hate. He was trapped between his burning need for revenge and the very message of grace he had so vehemently condemned, now kneeling before him in its most impossible form. His perfect system of rules and righteousness had crumbled to dust because it had no category for this. It had no procedure for a repentant monster. In the weeks that followed that day, in the square, Alexandria became a different city. The event had sent a seismic shock through the community, cracking the foundations of Gaius's rigid world. The grand assemblies ceased. The thunderous sermons on law and order fell silent. In their place, a thoughtful quietness settled over the people. They began to talk to each other in hushed tones, not to judge, but to understand. If a killer like Silas could speak of grace, and a righteous man like Gaius could be so consumed by hate, then where was the clean, simple line between good and evil they had always been taught to see? Lydia's family was whole again. Faced with the stark reality of Gaius's own brokenness, her husband saw the cruelty in his own actions. He had found his daughter, held her, and wept. The wounds remained, but the healing had begun. I did not leave Alexandria, but I did not become a leader either. I stayed and I became invisible. I helped unload cargo at the docks. I swept the market stalls after the merchants had gone home. I shared what little food I had with the beggars Gaius's followers had once shunned. I stopped preaching with words. I tried in my own clumsy way to live my sermon. Several weeks passed. One evening I was sitting on the edge of the pier, watching the ships sail out towards the open sea, their lanterns like fading stars. A figure came and sat beside me. It was Gaius. He looked 10 years older. There was more gray in his hair, more sorrow in his eyes. We sat in silence for a long time, listening to the call of the gulls and the gentle slap of water against the wood. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I spent my whole life building walls," he said, "trying to keep the evil out, and I never realized the greatest evil was in my own certainty." He turned to look at me. "I still hate what you did, Silas. I don't think I can ever forgive you for it." I nodded slowly. "I know. But," he continued, his voice softer now, "I also see how you've lived these past weeks. I see the people I cast out, and now they are caring for one another." He gestured to a group of people sharing a meal nearby. Lydia and her family were among them. "They are like wild branches grafted onto an old tree. It's a strange sight." He paused, a new thought dawning in his eyes. "It turns out the root supports the branch, not the other way around." I looked at him, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt the faint trace of a smile on my lips. It was a sad smile, but it was a peaceful one. My journey to Alexandria wasn't about proving I was right and Gaius was wrong. It wasn't about winning. It was about discovering a deeper truth. That healing doesn't begin when the scars disappear. It begins when we learn to live with them. Grace, I've learned, isn't an eraser. It doesn't wipe away the past. It's more like a light that shines into the darkest, most broken places in our souls. And then, by some inexplicable miracle, it makes that very spot the fertile ground where hope begins to grow. My story ends here, but all of our journeys continue. Thank you for listening to my confession. If this story resonated with you, even in some small way, I hope you'll consider subscribing to our channel. Because here, we aren't afraid of the darkness. We believe that inside every story, no matter how painful, there is a glimmer of redemption waiting to be found. Let's find it together.